The Audi Q5 is a big selling SUV. In fact, in 2023, it was the German manufacturer's best selling model globally. Audi says the new Q5 is more spacious, more modern, more dynamic. But is it? Today, we're in Munich to find out. And here is the new Q5. So what do you need to know about this car? Well, for a start, it's an SUV, and a fairly big one. In Audi's lineup, it sits above the smaller Q3, but below the bigger Q7. And the first generation model arrived back in 2008, and that car was built in Audi's factory in Ingolstadt. Then for the second generation Q5, production moved to Mexico, and the third generation is going to continue to be built there. And essentially half the models that are produced in that production facility in Mexico go to North America, and the other half come over to Europe. And we've said that this is Audi's best-selling car globally, but actually in the UK, it's its fifth best-selling model. That's behind the A3, A1, Q4 and Q2. But it is still clearly a very, very big deal for Audi. And the second generation Q5 has proved itself to be a really fantastic SUV. It's good to drive, it's really nice inside, so the third generation car has a pretty tough act to follow. Now that is the SQ5, this is the regular Q5 in S-Line trim. And let's talk about the design first, because you can still see really that this is recognisably a Q5, but there are some tweaks here and there. And you can really understand this approach from Audi because it's got a very successful, big selling car, it needs a new generation. Do you really want to rip up the design, or do you want to make some subtle tweaks here and there to hope that people keep buying it in massive numbers? So the things to point out are the fact that it just looks a little bit curvier than it did before, perhaps. The window line is also a bit higher. These headlights are also higher than they were before, and Audi is very, very keen to stress how happy they are with these upgraded lights that you can have at the front here. You can choose from 8 different light signatures, which give you some fancy patterns on the front and also at the rear. And on the SQ5, there's an interesting brake light setup as well. Those rear lights can also show warning symbols to alert drivers behind you if something dangerous is happening up ahead. And there are 11 different colours that you can choose from in total with the Q5. But if you really want to, then you can go to Audi Exclusive and get a fancy individual paint colour scheme of your choice. However, this is a rather expensive option. You can do this on any Audi model, but on a Q5, it might cost something like £4,000. The alloy wheels range from 17 inches up to 21 inches, but in the UK, the smallest alloy you can get is 19 inches, which seems mad because we have the worst roads, and typically the bigger the alloy, the less comfortable the ride, but the flashier the looks, which tells you quite a lot about the buying preferences in our market. Anyway, you can get four-wheel drive on a petrol version of the Q5, but what you can't get is four-wheel steering. And that is something that we've seen on the Audi Q7 and other big SUVs like the BMW X7 and also the Range Rover. And four-wheel steering makes big SUVs like them much easier to manoeuvre in tight urban spaces at low speed. So it is a shame that you can't get it with the Q5. But perhaps the big news with the new Q5 isn't anything that you can see or any new technology that it does or doesn't get, but just the fact that this, like the A5, is likely to be one of the last fuel-powered Audis that you'll be able to buy. The German manufacturer has said that every new car it launches from 2026 will be fully electric, and by 2033, it will take all of its fuel-powered cars off sale. This new Q5 will get a full life cycle between 7 and 8 years, but by the time a new generation model is needed, Audi will only be making electric cars. There won't actually be a fully electric version of this Q5 either, by the way. If you want an SUV built by Audi this kind of size that's fully electric, then you'll need to look at the Audi Q6 e-tron. So, no fully electric version. Instead, you'll have a choice of one petrol, one diesel, and one 3-litre V6 petrol if you go for the SQ5. Other Audi S models have a diesel available, but you won't have that in the SQ5. It will be petrol only. And for the regular 2-litre petrol and 2-litre diesel, they will feature Audi's latest mild hybrid technology, which they call Mild Hybrid Plus. And that features a 1.7 kilowatt-hour battery, which is massive for a mild hybrid. And in theory, it means that those cars should be able to travel for short distances at low speeds on electric power alone. However, the mild hybrid setup that those cars get adds almost 70 kilograms of extra weight, which is fairly substantial. So it no doubt helps lower CO2 emissions, but it will be interesting to see what the real world impact on fuel economy is once we get a chance to drive those versions of the car. Whichever one you go for, you get a 7-speed automatic gearbox, and later on next year we should see a plug-in hybrid version of the Q5 with a massive 62-mile official range, which is very, very impressive indeed. This is also the first SUV model built on the PPC platform, and that is Premium Platform Combustion. And it's the same platform that the Audi A5 is built on. And if you remember, the second generation Q7 and the first generation Q7 were also built on the same platform as the Audi A4 and A5s of the time. There's also a PPE platform, which is a premium platform electric, and that is what the Q6 e-tron is built on. Now, the Q6 e-tron might be built on a different platform, but you can see the Q5's interior takes more than a little bit of inspiration from that car. And basically, it has a very similar setup in here. So you can see you've got an 11.9-inch digital drive display, you've got a 14.5-inch touchscreen infotainment system, and you've also got this 10.9-inch screen for your front passenger as well. And it also has a mode where the driver can't see whatever is on that screen, otherwise it would be very distracting. Which is all well and good, but to be fair, you might find this touchscreen infotainment setup a bit distracting on its own, because if you're trying to use it while you're driving, yes, there's a voice command system, but really you're probably going to have to be poking and prodding on this touchscreen because there's no physical rotary dial in here to help use it, like there was in the previous Q5 before a facelift got rid of it, and indeed in the first generation Q5. But still, we've driven the Q6 e-tron with this infotainment setup, and we did find it to be one of the most responsive and impressive touchscreen setups around. So it should prove to be exactly the same in this Q5. It is just a shame though that there isn't anything physical to help control it. In terms of quality, it's also relatively impressive in here. In this spec of Q5, we've got some nice suede Alcantara bits on the door here. There's also this ambient lighting, which is going to be part of an optional package. And this third screen, by the way, isn't going to be standard on UK cars. That will also be part of the package. And really, interior quality does seem decent, if probably not class leading, but we'll have to get an idea of what the pricing will be of the Q5 before we can really assess it. Now, even though this is built on a new platform, the dimensions of the new Q5 are actually very, very similar to the previous car. So in total, this is 3.5 centimeters longer, but the wheelbase, the distance between the front and rear wheels, is only 1 millimeter longer than before. So ultimately, all that means is that space in the rear seats is very similar to what was on offer in the previous car. So you can see legroom, very good. I've got lots of space for my feet under the seat in front of me. Headroom is also all right for an adult, but if you were over 6 foot, you might find that with this sunroof fitted, it's not quite as generous as some other SUVs. And if you wanted to sit 3 people side by side in the back here, then just bear in mind there's quite a big lump in the floor here for whoever is sat in the middle. These rear seats though can slide forwards if you want to give yourself more boot space. And if you have this fitted, which is likely to be an optional extra in the UK as it was in the previous car, then they'll slide 60-40. So you can see these 2 seats slide forward together and this one slides on its own. If you want 7 seats in your Q5, you can't get that, but Audi does offer the Q7, which is a 7-seater. Just like the rear seats, the boot is very, very similar to the old Q5, even though this is built on a new platform. There is more space available, but it's apparently only around 5 litres of extra storage compared to the old car. Some of the differences to point out are apparently a slightly higher boot floor, so there's less of a loading lip at the front here, but there is still a loading lip intentionally left there because it does also help from a practical perspective so things don't slide out of the car at the end of a long journey perhaps. And there's even now space to store the parcel shelf under the boot floor. You couldn't do that on the old Q5, you can now, and that is a very, very handy practical addition to this new car. The rear seats split fold 40-20-40 as they did before. That comes as standard and is also very useful because it means you can fold down each of the 3 rear seats individually. So for example, if you still want to have 2 passengers in the back, but you want a bit of extra room to put something from the boot through to that middle row, you can fold down the middle seat. There will, by the way, be a new Q5 Sportback on the way as well. As with the current Q5 Sportback, it will be very similar to the regular car, but with a sloping roofline that robs a bit of rear headroom and boot space. The Q5 Sportback will arrive next year, and for the regular Q5, Audi will start taking orders around October, November, and first customer deliveries will be March next year. There's no word on pricing for any of the new Q5 models yet, and the same goes for trim details and technical specification. That info is expected to be announced later this year, closer to the car's official launch. The current Q5, for reference, starts at just under £50,000 in the UK. So it's reasonable to expect an increase on that for the new model. Thanks very much for watching this first look of the Audi Q5. If you want to see another video, then click up there and make sure you subscribe to our channel. And to find out more about the Q5 and to read our written review of the current model, click on that link to go to whatcar.com.